and we can both keep track of that as well.
Yeah.
I've got it tracking
Okay.
216.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you were talking about the idea, the concept of dopamine hits and where we get them and why they're important. And I think there's also times when when you don't get your dopamine hit the right way, it can be detrimental, and there can be too much dopamine. Now, I've heard very scientific people talk about this, and I certainly don't claim to be a scientist, but what do you know about dopamine, Jim, and where's it come into play in your life?
Well, I just recently finished a book. It's the second, this particular author. It's his second book, and he goes in it pretty deep. That and they're starting to talk more about it. So this book is related to dyslexia and ADHD and all of those wonderful labels that they put on people like myself that are neurodiverse. So
Neurodiverse.
that's, yeah, I guess that's the cool
Okay.
word right now. But anyway, I think it's all kind of bullshit. But I do appreciate this doctor because when he has it, so he doesn't speak from just the medical perspective. He speaks for personally.
Yeah.
And again, I don't even know if I want this part used. It turns out that some people have, particularly have ADHD or dyslexia. Your brain is a little bit different, for good or for bad, like everything in life, right? But one of the quotes that he says is, your boredom is your kryptonite. And it would the dyslexic mind needs to be stimulated because it's processing, and this is rough numbers, but normal human being processes 300 images per second. A dyslexic can to process 1,200 images per second as far as the things in their mind. They see things. It's why it's hard. It's why you're jumping ahead so much. It's why it's hard sometimes for me to read left to right. Right. My brain's all over the place. Mm-hmm. But it also has it wants the excitement. It constantly wants to be stimulated with dopamine, and it's going to get it a couple different ways. Unfortunately, most of it, 80% of them, will get it through drugs, sex, gambling, and it leads to bad things, right? Mm. It's also
dopamine might be then connected to addiction.
Well, there's no question. There's the absolute connection to it. And then when you start to look into the drugs, especially when they give them to kids too early, or they're not handled right, like Adderall and other Ritalin, those are stimulants, like, to get you up, because it turns out it'll reverse itself. But the bottom line is that we all want dopamine, and that's why we look at this is what the concern is right now with younger kids, not just kids. I'll speak for myself, adults. The dopamine that the phone gives us is really dangerous because they're tiny little hits, and then you become addicted to it. Your body wants it. It's like a rat.
I saw a couple of years ago, I think it was Anderson Cooper, who I'm not a fan of, so I wasn't seeking him out, but he was, they hooked him up. They did this staged. Because as a news guy, I'm sure he uses his phone as much or more than any other adult, like maybe more so, but they hooked him up to a machine that could register his pulse and his heart rate, mm-hmm. and a couple of other things as well. I don't recall exactly. And then they asked him, give us your phone. And they took his phone and they moved it to a table about 10 feet away, so he couldn't get to it, right? And stay connected to the machine.
Yep.
And then someone would send a text message to his phone and it would go ding. And his freaking heart rate went way up and his pulse went way up. And just in the process of taking his phone away, as soon as he gave his phone to them and they walked away with it, his heart rate went up and his pulse went up. I'm not talking a little bit. I'm talking like a lot.
Yeah. So it turns out the other one that I didn't mention, and it's related to what you're saying, is workaholism is also how to receive dopamine. So when you're working and you get an award, or your boss recognizes you for something that you did, there's a dopamine hit. And same with an email or a text message. Those are hits of dopamine. So yeah, that's a big, it really is our controlling our lives with these devices. Because remember, there was a time when you wouldn't have to deal with work stuff until the next morning, or you'd at least get a break in the evening. Now it's 24/7, and it's we don't know where it's going, but we know it's not going good. People are we've always been losing our minds, but they're not present. So the only way they can relax, well, they can't relax because they're addicted to their phone. And that's
I think I've said this to you before, but I was very close, still am, with my older brother and all my siblings, but he and I were in the same classes a lot because I was like a grade ahead kind of, and he was kind of a grade behind. And I guarantee he ended up being an F-15 fighter pilot, a FedEx captain. He's got 2 master's degrees and a law degree. He's a very accomplished guy, but in high school he was a meathead. And I guarantee you, because ADHD wasn't a diagnosis even back then, that he was ADHD, and nobody could figure out how to keep him challenged. And it wasn't that he was bored, right? It wasn't that he was stupid.
That's why he became a fighter pilot. I mean, he went
That's right.
Yeah.
So that to your point at the beginning, that some of these things are bullshit, like Adderall. I remember when my daughters were in college, they would tell me, and even in high school, they would tell me that there were certain girls that they didn't hang around with, but they would take Adderall to stay up the night before to study for a test, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so this thing just gets it. Once these drugs that are for conditions that could be treated with exercise or meditation.
Well, it turns out that there's a runner high is very much a release of dopamine. And there are good forms of.
Have you ever got a runner's high?
Yeah. I mean, I run, I'm not I run the hills just for fitness, but that's why I do it. It feels good.
No, but I'm talking about, I remember one time in particular when I was in my 20s.
I'm not a runner. Are you a runner?
I was for a little while. And
I see. I don't know. Tell me what a runner's high is. Maybe that's
I got to about the 5 mile mark, and I usually jog 2 or 3 miles, but it was sunny. The weather was beautiful. I had no shirt on. I was in shape. There's girls all along the beach, right? The scenery's wonderful. And I got to 5 miles and my whole body went through a shift. And I thought to myself right there, I could keep going forever.
Interesting. That's where the term comes from. I knew it obviously enough to use the term, but I didn't realize that's how it works. So
one time, I'll never forget it. It was a feeling unlike anything I've ever had before.
Yeah. But
it was intoxicating. And I think it probably is a reason that a lot of people, because most people, even athletes that run, they don't run 5 and 10 miles. They run 2 or 3 miles. They run maybe 4. Once you get to a certain place, that high kicks in. And I think in the marathon runners, you hear the stories where there's an area between about 5 miles and then somewhere close to 20, because after 20, the body's like breaking down. You're out of gas, and it's all emotional and mental from there. That's why people pass out and shit themselves and fall down, and some people make it through, right? Yeah. But those are stages in that marathon of 26 miles. But the first one is that high, and that lasts apparently for like 15 miles.
Oh, interesting. It's part of the sport, apparently. Yeah.
I never even thought about it until just now, because when we're talking about this runner's high. But anyway, I didn't want to change the topic, but
no, I think it's very relevant. Again, there's ways your body can produce dopamine. I mean, there's no question. Like I referred to it before, when I played the 20 straight seasons of rugby, I was getting my dopamine on Saturdays, right? And maybe occasionally during practice, because there is nothing better than that feeling of that. It's a high. It's a real high. You can get it get it from sex. You can get it from like you said, business, gambling. Then another one, people ruin their lives over gambling.
Yeah, it's definitely a topic that needs to be on the table, I think. And it's back to that self-awareness thing that we like to talk about from our wheel.
I always say we all self-medicate. Just pick your medication. I don't think it should be framed as something's wrong with you. I think that, it's just, you want to use natural medication again, running, working out, eating good, different things. There's other ways to get your release of dopamine.
Yeah,
So
I've been getting into a groove with my meditation. I think I was telling you, and it's there's definitely a huge variety of experiences when I meditate now. And I meditate typically for around 10 minutes. I'm not really terribly interested in extending that because the 10 minutes is typically very effective. But sometimes you drop right in to this state, this euphoric state of just like right now. I'm not thinking about anything else. And I've also been recommended, and I've tried it, and it's really a slightly interesting, different experience, is meditating with your eyes open, picking a spot on the horizon and just staring at it, and then trying to move your scope of vision to the entirety of the landscape and everything that might be in front of you. It's a very interesting exchange sometimes, but the more I do it, the more I drop right in. But I still have occasions when I just can't, there's so much on my mind that I can't drop in. Some thought enters, and you just have to learn how to drop back in, and there's no right or wrong to it, but it's definitely a dopamine activity. It has become for me.
I wonder if there's negative dopamine as well. Like some people maybe subconsciously, unknowingly will provoke a fight or provoke confrontation because they're seeking dopamine, but in all the wrong ways. I wonder if that.
Sure. Oh, I'm sure. Like if
it's not just positive dopamine, right? Some people maybe seek a negative dopamine of some kind of conflict that makes them, I don't know, refer back to when they were younger or something that they have comfort in. Yeah.
Well, back to my brother, he got into fights all the time. He was looking for that dopamine buzz, and when he quit flying,
I can relate to that one because I used to get a lot of fights, and I tell you, there's nothing more exciting. But so here's a question for you, Mark. There's dopamine and there's adrenaline. What's the difference?
Yeah, I would imagine it's a chemical makeup is the difference, but I'm not sure. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, and they're probably.
In sports, it's referred to a lot as your adrenaline is pumping, and
I think that's maybe what we used to call dopamine is adrenaline. I don't know, but they're similar. And I remember I didn't get into a lot of fights, but I remember a couple that I did, and that's a dopamine high. Yeah, whether you win or lose, it's a dopamine high.
It's much better when you win.
Yeah. Well, the first one I won, but I still ended up in the hospital getting stitches, and I ruined my best jacket. The guy hit me in the head with a flashlight at a bar in college. I'm like,
ruined many white T-shirts.
And then the other one, dude, and this is semi-related, but it's a good story. I'll make it quick. I'm on my own, and I'm with my son. He's 8 years old. I'm in the middle of a divorce. I'm living in an apartment, and I'm walking back from my car to the apartment. And we were on the second floor, and the people were on the first floor, like 20-something couple, Hispanic girl, white guy. And my son at 8 years old was above them, jumping around, I'm sure to their disdain, when they didn't want him to be jumping around. And she looked at me. They were carrying a laundry basket. She looked at me and said, "That's that fucking little kid that makes all the fucking noise." Right in my face, right? And I turned to her.
Does she know that you were the father?
Yeah. I turned to her and I said, "You bitch." Like I was immediately defensive of my child. And the kid dropped the laundry and he started making a beeline right at me. So he's 6-something, I'm 6'4", 230, but I was lifting weights aggressively at the time, and I was angry about everything I was going through. Right? And this kid
really angry.
He's making a beeline to me, and I'm like, okay, this is happening. And I brace myself, mentally, emotionally, physically, and I grab him. He doesn't even get to me. I grab by the neck. And I slam him up against the wall. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to fucking kill this kid. And if I hit him, I probably would have killed him. And my brain went, boom, you're going to go to jail. You'll never see your kids again. In a nanosecond. And I didn't hit him. I threw him on the ground, and one of the neighbors came out, and we broke it up, and she vouched for me at the place. But my son is watching this.
And what did this kid do? He just said, "I'm sorry," or he just said, "Did he try to be a tough guy," or what did he do?
He just walked away, because I told him
he didn't want. He was.
I had him on the ground. I said, "Say uncle, dude. I'm not letting you up. Say uncle right now. Or I'm gonna fucking kill you." And the other cool thing about that was, Jim, and you know this from fighting.
Yeah.
you know immediately when you are physically engaged with someone, I got this or I'm in trouble, you know, immediately, right?
Yeah. It reminds me of something.
Let me just finish.
Please.
The best part. So my son, who's 8, I'm talk about adrenaline, talk about dopamine. I am jacked up for like, I don't know, 25 minutes. But all this is over, and we get back into had an expedition at the time, and so he's sitting in the back, right in the middle. And I finally thought to myself, I wonder if he's okay, because I now was composed enough to think about him. And I turned around and I go, dude, are you okay? He goes, Dad, that was awesome.
What a great story. Yeah, I was trying to explain this to somebody the other day, and again, it's very barbaric. So full disclosure on this one. But I have to admit, I mean, again, I grew up in Hayward. I was a bit of a knucklehead. Very, very barbaric was normal, you know, or normalized at that time period. But I was comparing it to sports, you know, whether it's football, rugby, getting in a fight, and sex.
Mm-hmm.
That there is a certain point when you're in full control of something, there is a huge dopamine release. It feels really good to know that you have full control of something, right? Mm-hmm. And think about that with sex. That's what sex is, right? A woman has given herself to you, mm-hmm. to the point where, you know, she owns you. She surrendered herself to you, and mm-hmm. in a very obviously loving way. So it's not violent at all. But when you're, I remember this one summer I got in a fight every single weekend for the entire summer. we used to laugh. It's, you know, fuck or fight. That was, you know, it's one of the other Friday and Saturday night. But anyway, but yeah, that's when you have somebody and you either hit them or whatever you're doing, it gets very barbaric, but it's very human. It's a human thing. You get this release of dopamine because you're in full control, mm-hmm. and you just own them at that point. It's kind of sick, but I think it's a human thing.
I think it's one of those things in life that if you learn how to appreciate it and control it, you can use it to your advantage. But it's all the primal stuff. It's the survival
stuff. Primal. It's the primal.
It's primal. It's in our DNA. And it's, you know, people that don't, that's what they say about rape. Rape is not about sex. It's about control, right? It's about power, you know. But I think dopamine, and adrenaline, they can all be taken advantage of. We can all allow ourselves to be, that's the guy that can't stop gambling, right? I need to go back and spend money I don't have in a very illogical sense, because when I do that, I get this real cool buzz.
This is also relevant how we met. So this is related to concussions, right? So the NFL did all these studies and all this information on concussions, and it's a real thing. When you slam your head against other heads for that many years. Well, it turns out that the real study, the study behind the study, it's not actually just the concussions. It's actually it's not the head. It's the neck that causes a lot of this trauma. So it's not just the forehead. It's what's going on in the neck over a period of time. Now I'm coming on this just because I went through that protocol. You know, that's how you and I met, right? And I did the hyperbarics and so on and so on. But you also look at the personalities of the NFL guys especially when they're young, like in their 20s and 30s, and everything is dopamine, right? Let's just say it was Junior Seau, right? The linebacker for the San Diego Chargers, mm-hmm. one of the greatest. If you go back and look at his life, and there's a commonality to their lives, they always got a lot of dopamine off of the sports. Plus, they got all the attention. So and then when the sport ends, it's not just, in my opinion, it's not just the concussions. It's also the dopamine release doesn't come like it used to. And they have a hard time filling that through business or relationships. It's also why the relationships don't go so very well, because they're seeking that stimulation, that excitement, the dopamine. And at that level, how could you recreate that? It's almost impossible, right?
I told you about my brother, and when he stopped flying, he struggled for a good year
Mhm.
because you talk about not being able to replicate something, go and mock whatever. And
Well, it's same with veterans, right? Uh,
Mhm.
that's what
Acclimating back to a life where no one else is shooting at you. And, yeah.
there's a lot of dopamine release every day when you, like
Oh
you
yeah.
said, and you almost become, uh, you want it. You're attracted to it. As
Mhm.
horrible as it may sound to the outside world, you it's addictive. It's
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah. No, there's definitely something to be said for that. He's a football guy, I mean, even Troy said it on the session the other day. He goes, when I was started managing people, I was a football player. So the way that I thought people were to be managed was you yell at them and you raise your voice and you insist on this and no pain, no gain. And he said, I spent years having to
Yeah, that
rewire
doesn't work very
myself.
well. That doesn't cross over in business very well.
No,
I learned
no,
that
it
the hard
doesn't.
way a few times. Yeah.
Well, you can do it. Because I know my mentor, you did it early in his career. You can bring high performing people in, get them jacked up, manipulate them, yell at them, threaten them, pay them really, really well. But you got to sell the company in 2 to 3 years because it's not
Interesting.
sustainable. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense. But it's a pump and dump,
Yep. Yep.
but
Yep.
it's not sustainable. You
No.
cannot build a legacy company of I
No,
see.
it's not,
It's
and
a
it's not right.
it's not
It's not.
right.
Yeah.
You said it's a season, right? I mean, that's the other reason you have a season and you don't play all year round because you can't maintain that high level of intensity and dopamine throughout the year. You're going to do
Yeah.
it for typically a season's 90 days, right? It's
Yeah.
3 months.
I think the whole time we're talking about this, I think it's, you and I have both had to make adjustments as middle-aged men
Mhm.
and athletes to, my body doesn't like that anymore. I haven't jogged in years because my knees won't let me.
Yeah.
Right. And, if you're still lifting weights, you're not lifting as much as you were when you were in your 20s, and you have, I stopped playing full court basketball. I stopped playing tennis because of my shoulder. But instead of hitting the bars and the girls, I sought out spirituality. I sought out yoga.
Yeah, you
I
have to
I
replace it. You've done a
walking.
really good job with that. And I don't know if it's an age thing because we're a few years apart, but I find that I'm struggling with that a little bit of trying to, and your testosterone is also going down, right? That I think that has to factor in to this conversation a little bit because when that's very high, that's a different.
And you can replace that as well naturally. And I think my point really is to be conscious. And I don't know how good I have been at this. I could I have been better at it? What did there were the reasons I did it, and other people don't, I'm sure. But again, I have my dad is 90, almost 95 now. I've watched him make these adjustments, and like he said, one of his most recent ones is the first time I get beeped at more than once driving in a day, I'll give you my keys. Like you have to grab the keys out of most guys' hands. It's like, I don't want to drive my car, and then somebody gets into a crash. But the adjustments that you have to make in life, replacing bad dopamine with good,
Hmm.
or changing the places you go to get that dopamine. Like I said, now I get it from yoga. I didn't get it from yoga 10 years ago. I didn't even want to do yoga, right? And meditation. And I'm sure there's a whole litany of other things, but I think it's an awareness that, hey, I got to make adjustments as things move forward. And because this thing that really was an advantage, like I say for my brother, his aggression was an advantage most of his life until it wasn't, right? Because you can't go getting into fights when you got kids in the private school and you're going to church with these people. You got to stop fighting at some point. I don't know if you consciously remember when
Oh,
you
I
decided.
remember I wouldn't say I got my ass completely kicked, but I definitely was on the way to get my ass kicked. And that was my last official one at 21 years old. Haven't fought since. I mean, I fought every weekend during rugby, but that, yeah. Let's talk about alcohol and dopamine, because I do think I find myself, I definitely don't drink a lot because I just don't like the way it makes you feel the next day. But I have to admit, I like the dopamine on the first, I don't know, beer, first glass of wine. I typically don't go more than 3 anymore, just because I don't want to deal with it, how I feel the next day. And and other stuff. But I get a nice little dopamine hit on a
Yeah, there's a my
on a beer
experience
or a
with,
wine. And
yeah,
I don't know. I don't think that's good, but I do think that's one way to get some unnatural dopamine.
it's to me it's a balance. I don't, I'm all this stuff. I'm probably hypocritical on all this stuff here and there. I've been a drinker my whole life, and my uncles were drinkers, and
You're
my dad
Irish,
was,
isn't that
yeah, my dad was,
not the
my dad.
stereotype? But I think it's part of your DNA.
Yeah, it's genetic, it's cultural, it's
Absolutely.
environmental, and I think
Yeah.
that, yeah, when I have my girlfriend and I typically will do a shot of Irish whiskey, and we'll split a beer from the chill glass, and then depending on what else we have to do on a Friday or Saturday night, we might drink more, we might not, but yeah, there's a you get a warm feeling.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm referring to. Is that
Yeah, yeah, you get a I
does
get
that
it's, yeah,
stimulate dopamine? You think that isn't that a
I
form of dopamine?
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. And then if you continue to drink more, at some point, that feeling, probably if you had 5 drinks, the feeling between the third and fifth drink is probably the same. And now after, if you go more than 5, now you're drunk, and your
Yeah. That's
consciousness
the
is
part I
is
don't
gone.
enjoy that anymore. Yeah, that's not worth it, right? It
Yeah.
goes it's the opposite effect, but
And it depends on where you are. It depends on who you're with. It depends on what
yeah.
you have to do in the morning. It depends on a lot of things. But I've still gotten, I still get drunk every once in a
Yeah.
while.
I have
And
a
but I've never.
crackpot theory that a little bit, just about probably the amount that we're talking, a little bit of alcohol is a great lubricant for the mind.
Yeah,
And
that's probably where the danger is. It's like, okay, well, that one was good. Two's going to be even better, and three is going to be even better than that. And the more you get from 2 to 3, the less judgment you have
yeah,
as well. So
yeah,
there's a certain point, and I don't know what it is. The other thing for me is I'm a big guy, so I like my girl. I weigh twice as much as my girlfriend,
yeah,
so I can probably hold twice as much as her.
of
Like if
course.
she goes to a second drink, she's already tipsy, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because she's smaller than me.
yeah.
And but yeah, no, alcohol is definitely a dopamine hit. I suppose marijuana is too, and they all are probably Coke, and then you
I'm
get,
not at all promoting alcoholism, but I noticed that people that are wound up a lot, there's typically, I'm just speaking for myself and other friends, very good friends, where we can talk about this, right?
mhm.
Um, you can get a nice release of dopamine just on a good conversation with a good friend too.
Yep.
They're and no alcohol involved. But if you're
I
really
get I'm
wound up,
I get dopamine hits from doing this podcast, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. But there's genuine friends that know you, you know them, and you can get a nice little high or whatever there. Those are nice. I also, when you're meeting somebody new, for example, that it may lead to an opportunity, a business opportunity or something like that, there's some dopamine there. But I find that if somebody really is, say, struggling and that they're uptight, a little bit of alcohol will relax them enough where you can have the conversation. I'm not saying, get drunk with them, but that's what I meant by lubricating the mind. It does relax
Yeah.
you enough to let some
Yeah.
things out. I call it letting air out of the tire. So just take some of the pressure off, and then you get to it, and the next day you'll feel better.
Yeah, if you think about it, Jim, with what I do, when you're calling I remember the first deal I ever did. When you find someone a new job and you make the call, they've already committed to accepting it at a certain level, and you've gotten them maybe even more than that. So they're going to they're really going to be happy. It's one of the best calls I ever make in my
Yeah.
entire professional life. That's a definite dopamine high, you
Right.
know?
So yeah, I think the takeaway is there's all different forms of dopamine. Being aware of it when your body needs it, how to create it. I think that's something happens later on in life, because when you're younger, you just do it. You don't even
Yeah,
know
I
why you're
think
doing it.
I think to your point, I think to wrap it up, I think it's a thing. It's being studied a lot more aggressively, so there's available information about it all the time. And I think the biggest, most important thing is be aware of it as a thing, and then see where the areas are in your life where you're getting it, and then self-assess: are these areas in my best interests, or might I look elsewhere for that particular experience? Because I don't think I want to sacrifice the experience, but I do think I should probably consider getting it somewhere else.
Yep. Well, great way to wrap it up. All right, Mark,
All right,
until
thanks,
next week.
Sounds good. Well, I will